Welcome, I'm Sam Faddis. This is Ground Truth, and today we're going to be talking about, well, I guess we're talking about crony capitalism. We're talking about your tax dollars that are supposed to be going to things to benefit Americans and somehow are ending up in the pockets of people that you would never think they're ending up in the pockets of. With us to talk about this subject, Lisa Conyers, who is the co-author along with a gentleman named Phil Harvey of a book called Welfare for the Rich: How Your Tax Dollars End Up in Millionaires' Pockets and What You Can Do About It. And Lisa's got a very impressive background. She's a consultant for private clients and think tanks and an expert really on economic and public policy issues and consults on films and documentaries and has written for a whole stack of publications. But this is maybe the most salient point, although it has nothing whatsoever to do with what we're talking about. She lives in California on a sailboat, so I think that's pretty cool. I don't know if I could handle that, but I think that's very cool. Lisa, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me.
I don't know that I'm the greatest sailor in the world, but I do enjoy it. Again, I don't know that I could get rid of enough of my stuff to live on a sailboat and have that discipline that I know is required. Anyway,
yeah, absolutely.
Listen, the whole issue of how our tax dollars are spent, where the money ends up, uh, whether the government is or is not a good steward for our money is near and dear to my heart. I talk about it quite a bit. There are a number of aspects to this book that we'll delve into here, but I'd kind of like to start with this because I think it's particularly timely. As I understand it, we have PPP money that is ending up somehow in the hands of Chinese companies. Do I have that right?
You do. Yes, indeed.
Okay, so for anybody that's not tracking this abbreviation, when we're talking PPP money, what is that?
That's the Paycheck Protection Program that was passed early on during the COVID, back in March when we were trying to help small businesses, weather the storm of this virus before we realized what a long storm it was going to be. And the good intention behind it was we give small businesses money to maintain payroll and pay their bills and stuff like that while they were unable to actually do their business. And then if they kept employees employed for a certain amount of time and got back on their feet, then those would actually turn into loans that didn't have to be paid back. And the original intent was for the loans to go to small businesses. But as with all good intentions, when the government gets involved and starts handing out money, a lot of money went to a lot of very wealthy entities. And as you said, not only to American businesses, but to Chinese businesses, and not only Chinese owners, but owners from other countries as well. But Chinese businesses got somewhere between 200 and 400 million. About 125 Chinese companies have been identified that received funds through that program.
Okay, so this just boggles my mind, and I don't know why it should boggle my mind really, because God knows that as you say, anytime the United States government gets involved, the madness ensues. But we have this lockdown and this crisis, and obviously small businesses are getting killed by this. So we have this extraordinary relief package that's coming from the federal government to try to keep these businesses alive. And then you're telling me that we end up with hundreds of millions of dollars from this program that was sold on that basis that ends up going to Chinese companies?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's Chinese companies that have businesses here in the United States, right? So it'd be like, somebody
Sure.
from China comes here and starts business. But yeah, absolutely, that's exactly what happened. And that money was handed out so quickly that nobody was watching what was going on. Unfortunately, there was a tiny committee in Congress with 5 people who didn't even have the authority to see where the money went, who were assigned as the oversight committee. So weeks went by when checks were just being written right and left, and now we're left to look at what happened. And it's still going on. This isn't over yet by any stretch of the imagination. And now we're looking at where that money went. And I mean, one of the most absurd things is it went to companies that had thousands of employees. I mean, it was supposed to be limited to companies that had under 500 employees. Well, Boeing got trillions, big companies walked away with a lot of money, while the little guy couldn't get a dime out of the program because the paperwork was so onerous. I don't know about you, but I know small business owners that tried to apply and absolutely couldn't get past the hoops that they had to jump through. And meanwhile, big corporations had lawyers and accountants telling them, hey, go for this money fast. We've got the forms already filled out for you. Just go ahead and apply. So it's, one more example of the little guy, not getting the benefit that he's supposed to get while the big guys walk away with all the cash.
Yeah, I think this is, you really touched on something right there. I mean, everything you've said so far really resonates with me, but this point you just brought up about, the small companies don't really have the capacity to work their way through this process. The bigger companies can do this. I have this, this general impression from my experience that that's true on some level way beyond this specific program or this specific instance, that there's this relationship between big government and big corporations, where big corporations are built to feed off of this government money, and the little guy quite often can't tap into this. I mean, for instance, I know, since coming from the world of intelligence, there are companies that contract with the U.S. government to do training, for instance, with the U.S. government, and literally in many cases the only companies that are allowed to bid are Lockheed, Boeing, other giant corporations. Sometimes people are just formally locked out of this money.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you speak to some of the things that are in my book. I mean, for the first thing is that the reason those big companies get all that money is because they lobby very well in Washington, D.C. And for every dollar that you spend on lobbying in Washington, you will get $760 back in federal funds.
Oh, my God.
And try and find a return on investment like that in the private sector, actually, doing something for a living. It's pretty phenomenal. So you start to understand why they do lobby. It's very profitable to send a lobbyist to Washington. That said, there are hundreds of companies that can't afford to do that or really don't want to waste their time lobbying the Capitol and would rather just go about their business in the free market and make their money without asking for handouts from Washington. So it is pretty shocking when you look at who is actually going after that federal money. It is the big boys who need it the least. I mean, it's multi-million-dollar companies, billionaires, going to Congress and saying, hey, somehow I'm not rich enough, while the little guy can't get a piece of that. And it doesn't really matter what industry you look at. I mean, I looked at the agricultural industry, I looked at stadiums, I looked at the energy sector, and everywhere you look, the big players have gamed the system, and the money, our tax dollars are flowing into the federal, coffers, and then the feds are writing checks to rich people. It's baffling.
Yeah, and this has been true. And I mean, we're talking now, about some immediate examples concerning this paycheck, the PPP program, but I mean, this has been going on for a long time in Washington. We talk about how there's a partisan divide, but my impression is if there's something on which both parties historically have agreed, it is this, what I think you refer to as crony capitalism.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's absolutely true. And we actually mentioned that in the introduction to our book, the fact that this is one issue. We are such a divided country on so many issues, but on one issue, we can all agree that the 1%, or however you want to call it, the wealthy are gaming the system at the expense of all the rest of us who are paying taxes. And it's a very nonpartisan issue. I mean, I traveled the country for 2 years for this book, gathering stories. I've been all over the United States interviewing people, and seldom did their politics come up when this topic came up. I mean, I interviewed Republicans and Democrats and Libertarians and Independents and Socialists, and we weren't talking about politics. We were talking about this broken system, and so I think it's an issue that really resonates and makes people angry, and is becoming more and more apparent as the chasm between the rich and the poor gets bigger, and unfortunately, the bigger government is, and the more money of ours that they control, the more of it they're going to give away. And so, part of, I think, we have to look at is stop giving them so much power. I mean, right now, the regulatory system is designed so that if you can come up with a law that protects you and your industry, you can shut all the little guys out, for example. And so I think there's a lot of issues that could be fixed if we stopped giving the government the right to do all these give away all this money.
Okay, and based on your research, I mean, this cuts all the way across. Well, I guess virtually every industry in the United States. I mean, this includes farmers as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, the Farm Bill. It's just fascinating. That's what we start the book out with, is a chapter on the Farm Bill and Big Ag, and how we have this fantasy of the American farmer as this guy with a little red tractor on his little family farm, and it is so far from the truth these days. I mean, there are very few, if any, small farmers get government aid. It mostly goes to Big Ag, and it mostly goes to 5 big crops, corn and wheat and soy, and a lot of those crops aren't even used to feed Americans. They're shipped overseas. And so we're actually spending money on farmers who are not feeding our country, and they also aren't feeding us the food that's the best for us. People who grow fruits and vegetables cannot get farm aid. If there's been studies that have shown that if you eat what's subsidized in America through the Farm Bill, you're more likely to die young of heart disease and obesity and bad health. So we're actually paying farmers to feed us the worst food possible, and we're not supporting farmers that would be able to provide us with a healthy diet. And what's crazy about it, too, is that the average farmer has twice the median income of the average American. So why are we paying these millionaire farmers to grow their crops when they're millionaires? I mean, why do they need our money? Why do they need my tax dollars in order to do their job?
Yeah, well, and meanwhile, in my experience anyway, and this is all anecdotal, there are still a fair number of folks the smaller folks that are trying to farm. Often they are also working another job to sustain themselves. But the point is, I guess what you're saying is, that's great, but we're not helping them. We're not doing anything
right,
for
we're
them.
not helping them. If we're going to be handing out money,
those are not the folks that are getting our money.
Right, exactly. And they can't even apply for any. None of the programs apply to them. And so you've got, Big Ag sort of getting all of this money through the Farm Bill, and the little guys are, absolutely. There are lots of people, not just organic farmers, but just small farmers in general, who are just going about their business and have given up even trying to participate in the Farm Bill. And to their, credit, they're like, no, we'd rather just participate in the free market. And that's the craziest thing about all of this, is that corporate America would have you believe that they are, free marketeers, and that they're, pulled themselves up by the bootstraps and built these big companies. And then you look behind the curtain and you find out that no, they didn't. They, those big guys, they're taking money from the government, and they have all along. So they can, sing the song of the free market, but they're not doing it themselves, which is pretty baffling.
Fascinating stuff. I mean, do you have a prescription for how we fix this? You got the answer for how we turn this all around?
Well, we obviously can't end lobbying, because it's part of our right to free speech and our right to, address Congress with our grievances or whatever. That's what the foundation of lobbying is. But obviously the lobbying system is broken. The campaign finance reform would really help, because by the time you get into Congress, by the time you're on Capitol Hill, you owe so many big donors that you're beholden. And there are very few people on Capitol Hill that manage to avoid that problem. But if we could address campaign finance reform, that would be a step in the right direction. One of the problems is that only certain people get in the door to lobby in the first place. And if we made it more of a, anybody could really walk in, but basically what happens if you show up on the Hill and you don't have any money, nobody's going to talk to you. So if we could change how that works, that would be a step in the right direction. But beyond, fixing lobbying, our last chapter is all about the ways that people can get involved and fight back. And to me, the most interesting thing that has happened, I would say, in the last maybe 5 years, is there's a lot of organizations that are working on transparency. So what they're doing is that they're finding and this isn't just at the federal level, by the way, this is state, local, federal. They're getting those budgets uploaded on, in real time, so that you can see where your money is going. And we talk about some of those organizations that are doing that big data work, including the Sunlight Foundation, openthebooks.gov, Good Jobs First. Those 3 are the big ones that are really putting a lot of data out there for us all to look at. So it's no longer a mystery where our tax dollars are going. But then it's up to us, the people like you who have a podcast, or like me as an author or journalist, and people to write the stories. I mean, when I went out on the road and started looking for stories for this book, they're everywhere. It doesn't matter whether you're in, Seattle, Washington, or if you're down in some small town in Georgia, or if you're out in Hawaii. It's happening everywhere. You let people put their hands in the, taxpayers' back pocket, and they're going to do it. So I think that the more stories that are out there, the more outrage we can generate. That's a good thing, when we start calling them out. I don't know if you remember, but when the Paycheck Protection Program first started to release the names of some of the recipients, some of the corporations were embarrassed. I mean, there was an NFL team that gave back the money because they were like, uh-oh, people know we took that money. How embarrassing,
Right.
There was Shake Shack was another one that had taken a whole bunch of money and gave it back. So I think that when you make people uncomfortable by calling them out, that might be, I would love if the Paycheck Protection Program had a website where you could go on and look up every single recipient, to the minute. Because I think that would maybe change people's decision making as to whether they decided they wanted to be exposed in that way.
Yeah, well,
so that's the main thing that we recommend in our book is just getting involved at whatever level you're comfortable with, whether it's the federal budget or your local county budget or whatever, and just start, keeping an eye on it and saying, wait a minute, why are we paying for that stadium when our schools are ranked the last in the country? That kind of thing.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say was basically amen, but because I know people are incredibly frustrated with everything involving government and so many other things in the country, and there are 10,000 reasons why people are completely justified in feeling like there's nothing I can do. I don't care. I'm going to curl up in a ball and just let it happen. So I get it. I empathize, and then that's too bad. Like, suck it up, get up. Because and get involved and do whatever the heck it is you can do at your level, whether that's running for office, campaigning, just turning on the lights, writing, whatever that is, however you can make the difference, because that's the only way we fix anything in the country, right? And I'm not talking, my own political leanings are well known, but the point is I'm not talking to anybody. This is not specific. This is not a left, right, anything issue for me. It's everybody's got to be part of the game and part of the system and involved, or else, they will just continue to rob us blind, take your money, run roughshod over top of you. I feel in some ways this pandemic has, whatever we're calling it today, has just exaggerated in many ways these tendencies. When I look around across the economy and see every small business and restaurant forced to close down and giant corporations that are making more money than they ever made before, I'm having a hard time figuring out how that works. How some people make $13 billion a day and other people haven't seen a paycheck in months. But so on your book, again, the name is what?
The name of the book is Welfare for the Rich: How Your Tax Dollars End Up in Millionaires' Pockets and What You Can Do About It. Okay,
and your co-authors, you wrote this, you have a co-author, correct? I was correct on that?
Yes, I have a co-author, Phil Harvey, and we have written 2 books together, this book, and then the previous book we did together was called The Human Cost of Welfare, and it was about the welfare system in this country that's actually designed to help poor Americans. And it was actually in the process of writing that book when we started looking at federal spending, saying, wait a minute, a whole bunch of this money is going to rich people. What's that all about? And that's what led us to write this book. So we have those 2 books, and Welfare for the Rich just came out last week, so it's brand new, and you can find it on Amazon. We also have the book has a website, welfarefortherich.com, and if you get on there, you can read more about Phil Harvey and me, and there are links to purchase the book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and there's every interview that we've done is posted in the media section, so you can, hear more about us and about the book. And then there will also be an accompanying PBS documentary coming out with stories from the book, and that will be airing in May of 2021, and it will be called Corporate Welfare: Where's the Outrage? So you can look for that in the spring of 2021 as well.
Really good question. I like that title. Where is the outrage? Because I feel like that's the question in regard to so many issues these days. Is like, where is the outrage? Get mad, people. It's your country. It's not. It might not seem like that every day, but you actually have a lot of power if you choose to exercise it. But not if you're just gonna let people rob you blind. Again, Lisa Conyers. Lisa, thank you very, very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time on Ground Truth.